When we hear about potential progress against something like glioblastoma, it really makes you stop and listen.
Absolutely.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into some really interesting research. It hints at maybe a significant step forward.
And it's so needed. Glioblastoma, GBM, I mean, it's the toughest brain cancer in it.
Yeah, the prognosis is just stark. You're looking at maybe 12 to 14 months survival on average after diagnosis.
And that drops way down like 5.5 months if it comes back.
It just hammers home how badly we need new ideas, new approaches.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Which is why this new study is getting attention.
Okay, so let's get into it. This study suggests a potential link between a really common drug, gabapentin, usually for seizures, nerve pain,
Right, that's the one.
and longer survival times for GBM patients,
Right.
which is unexpected.
Very unexpected. And this comes from investigators at Mass General Brigham, but also, and this is important, it's been validated with data from UCSF.
Okay, so University of California, San Francisco, two independent groups seeing something similar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That replication is key. It adds a lot of weight. The work's published in Nature Communications. Dr. Joshua Bernstock is the lead author.
Right. So if, this diagnosis has touched your life or someone you know, this might feel like a glimmer of hope, maybe.
Possibly. But we need to be careful, of course.
Of course. That's what we're here for, to really unpack this research, understand the science behind it. Why might this link exist? But also, crucially, what are the limitations right now?
Very important to cover the limitations.
Okay, so where did this idea even come from? Why look at gabapentin for brain cancer? What's the biology?
Well, it ties into this pretty fascinating area called cancer neuroscience.
Cancer neuroscience. Okay.
Yeah, the basic idea is that brain tumors aren't just sitting there. They're actively interacting with the brain environment, with the neurons.
They're talking to the brain cells.
In a way, yes.
Hmm.
They can sort of hijack neural signaling to help themselves grow. There was a big paper in Nature back in 2023 that identified a specific protein, thrombospondin 1 or TSP1.
TSP.
And TSP1 seems to be a key mediator, like a bridge, facilitating this problematic communication between neurons and glioma cells.
Okay, so TSP1 helps the tumor thrive by managing this crosstalk, and gabapentin affects TSP1.
That's the connection. Gabapentin is known pharmacologically to lower the levels of TSP1.
Ah, I see.
So the hypothesis was, well, if we lower TSP1 with gabapentin, maybe we can disrupt that tumor neuron signaling pathway.
And slow the tumor down.
Potentially. There was some earlier work, in animal models suggesting targeting this connection with gabapentin could work. That kind of laid the groundwork for looking at human data.
Right. The animal studies gave a reason to look. Okay, so let's talk about the first big piece of this study, the data from Mass General Brigham. What did they see?
Okay, so they did what's called the retrospective analysis. They looked back at records.
Right, existing data.
Exactly. For 693 GBM patients treated there. And what they found was pretty striking. Patients who happened to be taking gabapentin.
Often for other reasons, like nerve pain, you said.
Yes. Often for nerve pain or seizures related or unrelated to the tumor itself. Those patients survived an average of 16 months.
Okay. And compared to patients not taking it.
Compared to 12 months for those not taking it.
So a 4-month difference.
A 4-month average difference.
Yeah.
And importantly, it was statistically significant.
Meaning unlikely to be just random chance.
Correct.
4 months. I mean, in the context of GBM, where progress has been so slow, that feels significant.
It absolutely could be. And like you said, the fact that many were taking it for other reasons makes it a really intriguing, almost accidental finding within their data set.
Yeah, it wasn't like doctors were prescribing it for the cancer.
No, not at that stage. Which naturally led to the next question. Would this hold up somewhere else? In a different group of patients?
Which brings us to UCSF. They tried to replicate this.
Yes. The MGB team collaborated with UCSF to validate the finding. They looked at a separate group, what's called a validation cohort.
Okay.
This was 379 newly diagnosed GBM patients at UCSF.
Did they see the same thing?
They did. And actually, the difference was even more pronounced in this group. Patients on gabapentin survived an average of 20.8 months.
Wow. Okay. Compared to
14.7 months for those not taking it.
So that's, what, about a 6-month difference?
Roughly 6 months, yeah.
Wow.
Quite a substantial difference in that cohort.
So 2 different hospitals, 2 different patient groups, but the same pattern emerges. Gabapentin associated with longer survival.
That's right. And when they pooled the data, combine the numbers from both centers,
Yeah.
over 1,000 patients in total.
Yeah.
the overall survival benefit remained statistically significant. It really strengthened the finding.
That sounds pretty convincing on the surface. Did they look at the TSP1 connection in these patients too? Did it line up?
They did. They also measured TSP1 levels in the blood serum of some patients.
And
And they found that generally patients being treated with gabapentin had lower levels of TSP1.
okay, so that fits the hypothesis, right? Longer survival and lower levels of the protein thought to help the tumor. It seems to connect the dots.
It does suggest a connection, and it raises an interesting possibility. Could TSP1 levels maybe act as a biomarker?
Like something you could measure to see if the treatment is working.
Potentially, yeah, an indicator of treatment response. But, it's really important to emphasize the exact mechanisms, how gabapentin lowers TSP1, all the downstream effects.
Yeah.
That still needs a lot more investigation.
Right. We have a correlation and a plausible biological link, but not the full picture yet.
Exactly.
And that brings us, I think, to the really critical point, the limitations. This wasn't a gold standard clinical trial, was it?
No, absolutely not. And that's the major caveat here. This was retrospective,
Looking back.
looking back at data collected for other purposes. So we see an association, a correlation. Taking gabapentin goes along with living longer, but we cannot say for sure, based on this study alone, that gabapentin caused the longer survival.
Why not? What else could be going on?
Well, there could be confounding factors, things they couldn't fully account for. Maybe the patients taking gabapentin were different in some other way. Perhaps they had different underlying health issues or received slightly different supportive care, or maybe the reasons they needed gabapentin in the first place somehow correlated with better outcomes. We just don't know for sure from this type of analysis.
Okay. So correlation doesn't equal causation. A strong hint, but not definitive proof yet.
Precisely. That's why the researchers themselves are calling for the next step.
Which is?
Proper clinical trials, larger prospective randomized controlled trials.
Right, where you specifically enroll patients, randomly assign some to get gabapentin, some to get a placebo.
And then you follow them forward in time, prospectively, and compare the outcomes directly. That's the only way to really prove cause and effect here.
That makes total sense. Need that control comparison. But despite needing those trials, the researchers, like Dr. Bernstock, sound cautiously hopeful.
They do. I mean, Dr. Bernstock pointed out quite rightly that we haven't seen major leaps in GBM survival since the early 2000s.
Yeah, it's been frustratingly slow.
So we need creative ideas, strategies based on the tumor's biology, and the idea of using an existing drug.
Gabapentin, which doctors already know how to use, known side effects.
Exactly. It has a well-established safety profile. That's a huge advantage. If these findings are confirmed in trials, as Dr. Bernstock said, it could be a meaningful and potentially practice-changing advance.
That idea of repurposing a drug is really appealing, isn't it? Taking something already on the shelf.
It can potentially speed things up significantly compared to developing a brand new drug from scratch. Less uncertainty about basic safety, for example.
Okay, so if we were to sum this all up, what's the main takeaway for people listening?
I think the core message is gabapentin, this very common drug, showed a surprising link to living longer in glioblastoma patients. And this wasn't just in one study, but across two large independent groups of patients.
And there's a potential biological reason for it, involving this TSP1 protein and how tumors might interact with neurons.
That's the running theory, yes.
Yeah.
The lower TSP1 levels seen in patients on the drug seem to support that idea.
And it's a big, but this was looking backward at data. It's not proof yet.
Crucially, yes. It's encouraging, it's hypothesis generating, but it's not definitive proof that gabapentin works as a GBM treatment.
So the next big step, the thing to watch for, is whether rigorous clinical trials can confirm these results.
Absolutely. Those future trials are essential. They will tell us if this potential can be translated into a real therapeutic benefit for patients.
You know, this whole deep dive really makes you think, doesn't it? How clues can come from unexpected places, like studying a common pain drug.
It really does. It highlights the importance of understanding the deep biology, but also being open to repurposing existing tools.
And it just reinforces the need for that careful, methodical research, the initial observation followed by rigorous testing. Makes you wonder, what other drugs out there, used for completely different things, might hold hidden benefits?
It's a fascinating question. And it reminds us that even for diseases we think we understand well, like GBM, there might be factors we haven't considered. Subtle interactions influencing how the disease progresses or responds to treatment. Definitely an area to keep a close eye on.